Hey, I'm Chey, and I like words, sounds, and reading words about those sounds. Ready? Rollin'. So I'm sure, as you've seen by the title of this video, it's just gonna be a TBR. But it's different for a couple reasons. Number one, because I never really do TBRs. I don't really see any point considering that I'm a mood reader, so I just generally have an idea of what I want to read. I rarely have a set list of things that I want to read, or that I think I'm gonna read, unless it's a book that I have from the library that's on a time basis, time deadline. So typically I don't do TBRs. This is not a typical time, my friends. Why is it not a typical time? Because it's May. Next month is June. And June is my birthday month. And if there's one thing that ain't ever been hidden about me, it's my craze for music. I love music. I freaking love everything about music. I love the music itself. I love the people behind it. I love the process behind it. I just love everything about it. Including, you can't see it, but I just slapped a stack of books. It's a good smacking. Including reading about music. Most of the time it's just through articles or interviews or liner notes, but I also just love to read books about music. And the people behind it, and blah 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 blah. And oh boy, I have had a stack of music books on my shelf for so long that I've just been meaning to get to, and then I just never do. For no particular reason. Like I said, it really just depends on when the mood strikes me. And until recently, and I don't know when this change occurred, I kind of had an aversion to reading nonfiction books about things I really cared about. Because I want to be able to retain as much information as possible, and so I knew that reading a nonfiction book would kind of feel like a chore. To be like, okay, well every single page, like I want to remember all this stuff. Which I say is odd for me, because for the longest time I read nothing but historical books, or nonfiction books. And it's just been in the past few years that I suddenly had this change in my attitude towards them. But now it's starting to change back. Mainly because I use the approach that Allison Pages takes, which is basically pick up what you can, pocket what you love, and remember there's no test at the end. Plus, these are my books. I can always go back and look through them. There should be no pressure. So being as my birthday is in June, it's coming up, and also, this month I have a ton of concerts that I'm going to, which I probably talked your ear off about in several other videos. Also, bless y'all's hearts for the incoming concert vlogs that will be later this month. I decided I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna try and make a TBR to focus on getting these music books read. I'm putting my foot down and I want to get it done. I want to read them, and so I'm gonna try. But there are a lot of them, and they're quite lengthy. Therefore, I decided it wasn't quite fair to try and read all of these in June, and I decided to include May as well. And honestly, I'll probably end up including a few of them in July. Though I'm excited for it, I'm really trying to keep this low-key. I don't want to pressure myself to rush through these books just to get them done. If I only end up finishing 6 of them in these 2 months, which I think I'll finish more than that, but even if I only end up finishing 6, I'll be okay with that. I'm just happy to get 6 read. I'm happy to have learned what I learned from these 6 books. At least that's the approach I'm trying to have. I really do want to get as many of these read as possible, just because they have been haunting me for so long. Something I'm not quite decided on yet. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to film a couple of reading vlogs surrounding this. I may not, I don't know yet. But without further ado, let's get into the actual books, shall we? Now, some of these are higher priority than others. I do want to read them all, but when I get to the lower priority ones, you'll see why. The first one we have is No One Here Gets Out Alive. This is a biography of Jim Morrison, the frontman of The Doors. Little middle school Chey was obsessed with The Doors. I don't want to go much further into it than that. I actually had a copy of this book for several years, but then it kinda got waterlogged, and I always told myself that I was gonna pick up another copy, because I had started reading it when it got waterlogged, but I just never picked up another copy. I think it became like really hard to find because it was no longer being printed. I think it was this year, I walked into a thrift store, and they had this copy. And I was like, oh my god, I've never like seen another copy out in the wild that wasn't, you know, like $100 or something like that. So I took it as a sign, and I picked this one up, and I am finally going to finish it. The next is Revenge of the She-Punks, a feminist music history. I picked this book up the last time I was in DC when I was visiting Alex. I think I picked this up at a record store. If there's one thing I love almost just as much as music, it's history. In fact, after I took on my major of history at Georgetown, I tried as much as possible to focus on music. That's what my thesis was about protest music. If you want to get specific, it was about Thatcherism protest music. All that to say, there's a special place in my heart for more modern music history, especially punk, and especially the aspects or the perspectives that mainstream history or our sources about it have tended to leave out. Feminist, POC, etc., etc. I'm very excited to get into this one, and it's quite short as well, so. Kind of on that same train, we have To Live and Defy in LA, How Gangsta Rap Changed America. This one I am crazy excited for. I also, I think, picked this up the last time that I was in DC. Hip-hop is a musical genre that I feel I don't know enough about history-wise, and especially its impacts in areas that became famous for it. Even though I don't know that much about gangsta rap and early hip-hop's history in comparison to other genres, it's a genre of music that I was very much raised on. And I've talked about it in a couple different videos, so I won't get into it. Just as an example though, a very basic example, by 5 years old I was rocking out with my mom to Straight Outta Compton. Again, like I said, basic example, but you get the idea. So it's not a subject that's totally foreign to me, but it's something that I feel I only have a base level knowledge of, and I'm just really excited to get into it and learn more about it, and I think this book is a great place to start. To the Limit, The Untold Story of the Eagles. The Eagles are a rock band that I was also heavily raised on. My parents were teenagers in the 70s, so the Eagles is big in our house. The Eagles are. Well, they're one entity because they're a band. They're not multiple, but I guess the members are each Eagles. The band is big in my house. That's what I'm trying to say. Or at least they were growing up. I was never a huge fan of the Eagles. I really like the Eagles, but I'm not crazy about them like a lot of people are. They do fascinate me though, more so for their individual members rather than the band itself. Like Glenn Frey and Don Henley are so interesting to me, especially Glenn Frey, who, rest his soul, I believe was a musical genius. He was also best friends with my favorite artist of all time, Bob Seger. They wrote a lot together, they played a lot together, and Bob even did some stuff with the Eagles. So I'm kind of hoping that Seger gets a mention or two in this story. Besides my general excitement to learn more about them and to hear some great rock and roll stories, I'm excited to see behind the scenes of some of my favorite songs, the process behind making those songs. I know the studio nerd side of me is coming out and I don't care. What do you think led me to become a studio engineer in the first place? Reading all those stories and being like, man, I want to be in there one day. I want to be a part of one of those stories one day. Back to my point. The main reason I'm excited to read this book is for all the crazy tea. All the drama. The Eagles are not only famous for some of the most impressive and amazing songs that have stood the test of rock and roll time, like Hotel California, but also for their crazy fights, and their rivalries, and their bickering, and all the drama, and I'm just, I'm nosy. So yeah, the stories, the history, that's cool. Give me the tea. Rip it up and start again. Post-punk 1978 through 1984. I originally picked up this book as a source to use for my thesis at Georgetown. You want to know how far I made it in? Chapter 1, first page. Didn't even start it. It wasn't because I wasn't interested. It was because the process of a thesis made me hate my life. I hate investing a lot of time into reading a 300 or so page source, only to use like one quote from it or to never use it at all. I think it's stupid. I think it's a waste of time. I think it's infuriating. At least for me personally. God bless your souls for all you out there writing theses, or if you know someone who's writing a thesis, give them a hug. Stuff sucks. But this book, I'm sure doesn't. That's no reason to hate this book. The book did nothing to me. I chose that torture for myself. But at least I wrote about something that I loved and was interested in. Some of my biggest interest in music history involve not only protest music, but trends in music, and how music adapts and evolves on itself, and how the next musical styles that become big are often in response to the previous ones. Like how the Chuck Berry kind of rock and roll, and it getting big, was in a response to the commercialized, more poppy, bubblegum-esque music that was before. And I also just love punk music. One of my favorite bands of all time is The Clash, but I also like a lot of the music from the post-punk era. Being that as it is, I'm excited to read this book all about the post-punk era. I think this is like specifically talking about the UK. I'm excited to learn more about this genre of music, and especially how it came on the heels of the punk explosion. Read and Riot. This is a political guide to protest. I can't say the name of the band that the author is in because I would probably get stricken on YouTube, which sucks. But they are one of the most active, or at least were at the time, active political protest bands against Putin in Russia. And their band has 2 words. The first begins with P, and the second word is riot. I'm sure you can put that together with context clues and a little bit of Google searching. And it's just a guide to how to protest, namely inspired by their and the band's experience with protesting. And I think they would know. I don't know, I just picked this up a few years ago. I think I picked it up at Politics and Prose. I definitely picked it up when I was at Georgetown because I had this in my dorm room. I think I got a pretty good amount through it, but I never finished it. Now's the perfect time to do it. Yeah, I did get it from Politics and Prose. Wow, Chey, open up the cover. There's a bookmark from Politics and Prose. How the Beatles Destroyed Rock and Roll. An Alternative History of American Popular Music. Again, as I've said, I love learning the history of music and how it evolved and how it changed and how it originated and how those different types of music are all interconnected to each other. If it originated in response as a protest, as part of a subgenre, what have you. I love seeing how it's all connected. And that's what this book does. It says, Elijah Wall traces the evolution of popular music through developing taste, trends, and technologies, including the role of records, radio, jukeboxes, and television, to give a fuller, more balanced account of the broad variety of music that captivated listeners over the course of the 20th century. I love that. If there's one thing I've learned from studying history basically since I was born, history is always more complicated than it seems to be. There's always so much more at play than what you realize. And sometimes it's not left out on purpose, it's just too complicated to tell, and so people weed it out. Now, of course, for other reasons, things are left out on purpose. But as for this book, I'm excited to get an in-depth look at all those elements that I love. I did take a rock and roll history course when I was at Georgetown in my senior year, and something that I hyper-focused on in the class, just because it was fascinating to me, was the powerful role of technology in helping to evolve rock throughout the years. That's a rant I won't get into now, but I'm excited to see someone else focusing on it because I think it's an undervalued part of rock and roll history. Everyone always talks about the British invasion or the popularization of television and vinyl, but there's so much more in the wake of technology that allowed music to become what it is today, namely due to accessibility of technology to the average everyday person, across all genres, but especially in rock. Let Fury Have the Hour, Joe Strummer, Punk, and the Movement That Shook the World. I saw Joe Strummer on the cover. I love The Clash. I was pretty much sold already. But you give me a book about punk and how it changed the world, I'm doubly sold. Make that book about Joe, his music, his political activism, and how it changed the world, I am triply sold. Sold, sold, sold. And that's what it is. It's a book about Joe, the activism and the music that he was involved in, how he impacted people and impacted the world. Big Man, Real Life and Tall Tales. This is a memoir of Clarence Clemons. You may not know him by name, but I guarantee that you have heard him play. He's most famous for being the saxophone player of Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band, but he's played on so many pieces of music, so many albums and songs. He's a legendary musician. It doesn't go much more deeper than that. I'm just fascinated by him, his career, and his stories. Out of the Vinyl Deeps, Ellen Willis on rock music. Ellen Willis was the first popular music critic of The New Yorker back in the 60s. She was one of the pioneers for women music writers, music critics, music scholars, even. And this book is just a collection of her different columns and essays over the years. I know more of her legend than I do her or her writings, and I'm happy to finally be able to inform myself better. I also don't think I've ever read a collection of essays or columns that wasn't for schoolwork, and it's something that I'd like to get further into, but I'm not really sure where to start, because I think to pick up a compendium like that, it would have to be all about something I'm generally interested in, and I figured this was a good place to start because it's about music. And I was also a music critic, music reviewer at Georgetown. I wish I had started it earlier than I did. I didn't join the radio station until my junior year. I wish I had joined my freshman year. I would have been so much happier. I love that place. Shout out to WGTB Radio at Georgetown. They're amazing. This next one's pretty darn self-explanatory. Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. It's Bruce Springsteen's memoir. Autobiography. I read the back. Autobiography, memoir, they're basically interchangeable, right? Except the caveat that the autobio has to be written by the person who it's about. It's his book about his life. Bruce Springsteen, another name that doesn't really need any introduction. I was also raised on his music, not a surprise. I did watch a documentary about him recently though, and it was mostly previously lost studio footage. And again, the studio nerd coming out. Fascinating to watch. So much fun to watch. And you could tell that it was something that was organically filmed. It wasn't like they just brought a video crew in there in the 80s as like promo for like, here's the guys making the album. No, it felt like home footage because it was. Everything that I saw in those clips does not look staged. It looks like what I have seen happens in a real studio. The creative process, the fights, the big victory moments, all that. Really cool, really fun to watch. And again, this is a book that I've just had for a while and I'm finally ready to get into it. Now we're to my lower priority books. Why are they lower priority, you may say? It's not because I don't want to read them. I do. They're all thick boys. This one is the least thick, so I'll start with it. But it's a guide to start and run your own record label. Low priority because I'm never going to use this as a guidebook to actually run a record label. I don't want that kind of responsibility. But as someone who works behind the scenes in the music industry, this is just another big element of the music industry that I want to learn more about. It's something that I know the basics of, and I have a little bit more experience with than I would say the average person just because of the nature of my job, but it's still something that I want to learn more about. And I've read that this actually has some really good advice, some really good facts and tidbits. I don't know if it's still up to date, but it should be fascinating nonetheless. That one's lower priority just, again, because I'm not gonna use it. I'm not reading it as a source book to be like, okay, how do I do this? It's more just for fascination. The reason that the last two are lower priority are just because they're oral histories, which means they're just a big compilation of interviews about the subject. So it's not something that I feel the need to read all at once. Maybe I can read a chapter at a time or a few chapters at a time. The first is Please Kill Me, an uncensored oral history of punk. I love punk. I love learning about it. I love hearing from people that were around when the scene started and have seen the scene change and evolve, and I've read good things about it. I want my MTV, the uncensored story of the music video revolution. Like I said earlier, I think the role of technology and its accessibility has really been downplayed when it comes to music history. I think now it's getting more the love that it deserves, but only just. However, I do think MTV's giant role in music history and changing music history forever has always been indisputable, at least for the most part. Because as the title says, it really was a revolutionary thing. My mom was a teenager when MTV first came out, and she's always telling me stories about how she would have it on every TV that they had in the house. Or everywhere she went that there was a TV, she would do her darndest to have it on MTV wherever she was. I think it's gonna be fun, I think it's gonna be informative, but I'm gonna take my time with it, cause she thick. Like me. For real, for real. Consider yourselves lucky. I almost just went on a tangent about how important Run DMC's collaboration video with Aerosmith was, especially for MTV, music history, and music in general. But I'm not gonna go there. That's a rant for another day. I will say this though. I don't have many hills that I would die on. This is the hill that I will die on. The version of Walk This Way that Aerosmith did with Run DMC, miles superior to the original Walk This Way by Aerosmith. That's my hill I'll die on. I'll die on it. One of my favorite songs as a kid, and still one of my favorite songs. But only the version with Run DMC. But yeah, this is a book that I'm gonna take my time with. I'll eventually finish it though. Just like the rest of these. I'll eventually finish them. When? That's it for all the books though. I honestly can't even give you an expectation for how many books I'll finish by the end of June. I hope it's most of them. But I'm not gonna jinx myself by saying a number. More importantly, I'm not going to push myself to do it. As for now, though, that's going to be it. If you're looking for more book videos, book reviews, book vlogs, book challenges, I have a whole books playlist for you to check out. Thanks so much for watching, and if you ain't heard it from anyone else today, I love you. Love and peace.